Hello. The film that I want to talk to you about today is a film called Beau, Travail, directed by Claire Denis from 1999. A great year for films if you include The Matrix and Magnolia in the mix, amongst many others. Not so much for American Beauty, but that's a whole different other discussion. So I've known about this film for quite a bit. I've seen it in many of Criterion's recommendations, and I've heard of Claire Denis as a filmmaker as well, specifically watching an interview with Barry Jenkins, him discussing how White Material is one of his most favorite, most coveted films of all time. And I know that she did the most recent film with Robert Pattinson in Outer Space, but I've just never given her a shot, mostly due to me being afraid of not understanding what her films will mean, given that she gives a lot of importance on visual primacy, and a lot of her films can feel almost like poetry. And so, me fearing that I won't understand what it's trying to represent ultimately deterred giving her a chance and watching any of her films. But I heard a lot about this film, and it was raved as one of the best films made in the 90s from sources that I can't remember at the moment. But I just saw it on Criterion, and I just said, hey, let me block out an hour and 45 or so for this film to watch and see what I think. So after the film finished, I took a deeper look into all the factors that contributed to it. I think one thing that's important to consider when watching the film is Claire Denis's biography herself. I think she was born in France, but she grew up most of her life going through several colonies within West Africa, because her dad served as a colonial official, and I think wanted to expose her to life amongst the different lands within West Africa. So in a lot of her films, her experiences growing up as sort of the settler within a colonized land, it informs a lot of the themes and the subject matter. The montage sequences of the soldiers' training regiments have this sort of visceral effect. And not only is the image of this choreography appealing to the eye, but it also just shows the force of collective action and how it strips the sense of self from these soldiers involved in these rituals. In a lot of these montages, you have the soldiers, and then you have Galop, which kind of furthers his isolation from the unit, even though he still feels greatly attached to the idea of the military, the idea to serve and protect, or whatever the creed is that they are meant to follow. The cinematography is done by Agnes Godard, and I feel that it shows the very vast landscapes of Djibouti and a lot of Eastern Africa, as well as just showing the contours and the contrast of the human body, specifically with the trained killers that are the French Foreign Legion. There was just this understanding of knowing when to shoot outdoors, because as you know, if you shoot in the middle of the day, the shadows that are going to cast off of your subjects are going to be very unappealing and not aesthetically pleasing to the eye. There's also the use of Benjamin Britten's 1951 opera that's sprinkled throughout a lot of the montages that you see in the film, and I think what it does is that it elevates the image beyond just being purely formal. It gives it a greater sense of meaning. For me personally, the sequence that stood out amongst everything else was the moment after the bomb goes off and the images that follow, which show Satan and a fellow soldier being hoisted up by a fisherman's net into a boat, which Galop is staring very intently at Satan. So it further contributes to that tension between them, but it also is done in such a way not to show the blast of the impact of the bomb, instead showing the decay of its aftermath, which I think in itself gives a very powerful effect by withholding certain information. So much like the way that Claire Denis grew up herself, this film explores what it means to be a foreigner in a distant land, but also what it means to be a foreigner to yourself and not know who truly you are in the context of everything. There's a great line that's said by Commander Forrester at one point, which is, the ideal of what you're fighting for just keeps changing. So for a lot of these fellow soldiers, the unity that keeps them together is themselves, not so much this creed that the military enforces onto them, because that is sort of intangible but also fleeting. As he says, it's always changing. There's also this great line that I found in an article after watching this film, which is the idea of not belonging to the exterior and the interior, and I feel that very much sums up what this film is all about. But yeah, the central conflict that this film focuses on, whether it's blatant or not, is this triangle that is formed between Forrester, Galop, and Satan, and how there's tension within all three characters. Galop's voiceovers offer remorse for his prior actions and offer this existential examination of his life. But I think what's crucial for understanding this film as it relates to the tension between all these characters is just the cutaways between all of them and how these close-ups frame a lot of the angst that is shared between them, whether it's more blatant than others. And this repression that they keep within themselves ultimately leads to sort of very extreme ends. Less so on Forrester's sense, but more so with Satan and Galop. Post watching this film, I found that a lot of people raved about the ending and trying to understand what it means, but also its powerful effect. So what happens is you have Galop making his bed in a very neat, uniform way as the military instructed him to. And after he makes his bed, he pulls out a pistol and he lays in bed with it on his back, and he's sort of looking at the pistol and looking around the room at the same time. At one point, the camera pans to a tattoo on his bicep that reads, "Serve the good cause and die." And then from there, the muscle in his bicep starts to pulse, and as it's pulsing, we hear the track "The Rhythm of the Night" begin to play, and it slowly fades in as Galop is lying there in bed. And then as it increases in volume, we see Galop alone in a nightclub, standing there amongst these, different brightly colored lights. As he's standing there, he begins to get more and more comfortable until he starts to dance in a very erratic fashion. So to me, a good ending provides resolve, but a great ending leaves the circumstances of the story open-ended in a way that feels tethered to what preceded it. For much of the film, Galop is very hard on himself and is following by orders from the military, and he frames his life in such a way that would align with the values of the military. To him, he feels a part of this collective. Now, what happens when all that's stripped away? That's what I feel like the ending alludes to, is him trying to figure out what being alone really is and having no individuality, because all of yourself was tied to the good of the objectives of the military. And I feel like it said all of that without being too blatant about it and without being too literal about it as well. So in essence, the ending represents this shattered individuality where the collective is no longer present. If you're a casual viewer, this film might not be for you because you might expect a film to work within a certain formula and work within the confines of your own pleasure of watching a film. So I totally understand that this film might not be up your alley. You might think that a story should play out in this way and that causality should govern your understanding of what this film was all about and not be too abstract for your taste. So this film might deter from all of those reasonable expectations. However, if this film does appeal to you, it might be because it falls outside of the conventional storytelling tropes that Hollywood has put out for a number of years, and instead focuses on this fragile masculinity within a powerful military institution, as well as the degrading effects of colonialism. And in this case, it shows colonialism in such a pathetic fashion because it shows the presence of an army of which the country that they represent no longer holds political authority in that land. And a lot of that is just sort of expressed by the native population that are there, that are overseeing these soldiers perform in these ritual training exercises and looking in sort of confusion as to why they're there and what they want. So the film for this type of viewer becomes less about trying to figure out the narrative holes within the film, but instead the impression that it left onto you overall, because this film is so focused on its visuals and more focused on feeling rather than rationality. You have to look at it through that lens, and I think you'll get the most out of it when you do. So those are my thoughts of the film. I'm glad that I went through the experience, even if at times I did feel a little bit lost. I eventually found more of an appreciation as I thought about it more and more post-screening, and I think that's a mark of a film that of a higher quality. And I'm definitely looking forward to watching more of Claire Denis's films. Thank you for watching. I appreciate you taking the time to see what my thoughts are as I'm trying to dissect every little bit of these films that I watch. And I'll see you next time.